So, you know, happy birthday Mikael Tal, and, you know, happy whatever day to the rest of us, because the festivities have started. Magnus Carlsen against Fabiano Caruana, the most anticipated match for a very, very long time. Now let's just get right into it. Caruana had the white pieces. He drew the white pieces during the opening ceremony yesterday, so he starts the match with the white pieces, and Magnus Carlsen with the black pieces. Now I mentioned in my preview that E4 was the most the move to be expected, and that's what Caruana played. He has been playing it most of his life. People expected that. I mentioned that in my preview. But already here, Carlsen surprised, even shocked the world. He has played 3 previous World Championship matches, and in all of them, pawn to e5 has been his main move. Against Anand in the first match, he played Caro-Kann in the first game, maybe to throw Anand off, but then he went to the Ruy Lopez and we saw some Berlins. So this is of course the Ruy Lopez, for those who don't know, the Spanish game. So this has been happening in almost all of the World Championship matches. Anand more or less avoided e4 in the second match, but Karakin again played e4 last match, so we saw a lot of Ruy Lopez. But already a surprise on the first move in the first game, the Sicilian by Carlsen. Now what does he have up his sleeve? Knight to f3 and knight to c6. So here Caruana didn't go for the open Sicilian, which happens after d4. He played bishop to b5. But d4 is the open Sicilian, and I'm actually quite curious to see what Carlsen had up his sleeve if they had played the open Sicilian. Perhaps he would have gone for the Sveshnikov. But having played knight c6, you cut some options. You can't play the Najdorf, you can't play the dragon, although I doubt he will play the dragon. But maybe we will see that at a later stage in the match. In any case, bishop to b5 was played. I do, however, think that Carlsen played c5, like he played the Caro-Kann against Anand to throw him off, and then he will go back to his solid e5. But let's see. g6. Already on the fourth move, black allows white to double his pawns. Caruana accepts and d takes c6. So we have this doubled pawns already, but as compensation, black does have the bishop pair, and it's usually an even battle. But already an unbalanced position, which we like, because sometimes these matches start off really slowly with boring games, but none of this in this one. So here, play went down the most well-known path here, d3, development by both sides, h3, preventing the pin of the bishop jumping into g4, knight to f6, knight c3, and knight b7. Now why is he moving the knight for the second time? Well, it turns out black wants to put a knight on d4 in his fantasies. So if he can do that, he can play maybe at some stage e5, and then swing the knight from f8 to e6, and then into d4. That's sort of the stock plan for black in this position, and that explains the maneuver of the knight to d7. White played bishop to e3, e5 as expected, and now castles. Queen d2 is actually the most common move. Queen to here, and from there white can castle short or castle long. Sometimes trade the bishops, but black doesn't mind that trade in most cases. But Caruana went with short castles, and now a rare move by Carlsen, b6. Most likely surprising his opponent. Queen e7 is the move that has been played most often here, and it has even been played by the mighty Garry Kasparov against Peter Schindler back in 2004. But Carlsen, he played b6. Now we have knight to h2, and it's clear that white wants to open up the f file to play f4. That's, well, more or less the only reason to play knight h2. At some, maybe at some stage you want to jump into g4 and attack some squares if black were to castle short. And Fabiano had also played a similar idea against Nakamura in 2015. But let's see what transpired. Carlsen went on with this knight maneuver that we already mentioned, knight to d7 to f8, coming to e6, eventually d4, maybe f4 in some cases. But here, Caruana opens up the position with pawn to f4. Carlsen took, as otherwise white might clamp down by simply pushing this pawn to f5, so he takes f4, and now rook takes f4. It's a matter of taste if you take with a bishop. In both cases, white wants to double on the f-file, so the bishop would have to get out of the way anyway, so the clumsy position of the rook perhaps doesn't matter that much. Carlsen went on with development. He played bishop to e6. The rook swung back to f2. Maybe not necessary yet, but eventually you have to do it. h6 and queen d2. And here comes the first new move of the game, meaning that this position has been reached before. In that game, black played knight to d7, but Carlsen had more aggressive intentions, g5. And at this stage, I think we can say that chances are about equal. Again, black has the damaged structure on the queen side. It's not much of an issue, to be honest. But there's compensation. He does have the bishop pair. Caruana naturally doubles the rooks. Queen d6. And here it's clear that black wants to castle queenside and get shelter for his king. Knight g4 happened, and long castles. And perhaps knight to g4, if we go back, was not the best move, and a start of a faulty plan, and perhaps white should have played a4, sort of anticipating that black is going to shelter his king on the queen side, and then you're ready in some stages to push a5 and try to open up the position. After this, we have knight to f6, and Carlsen immediately challenges the knight with knight to d7, and here knight h5, and well, this turns out to give this whole operation with knight g4 f6 to h5. This maneuver here seems to give black the upper hand because the knight doesn't stand particularly well on h5, and it's dominated by the strong bishop here on e5, so kind of a bad knight, and we can say that black has the upper hand now. No real weaknesses, and white doesn't have any obvious play against his king or any pawn breaks. So black will just, build up his position on the king side. He now plays f6, not strictly necessary, but preparing to improve the bishop. Play it to f7, maybe to g6. Some cases take on h5, although in the current position doesn't seem strategically feasible, as the knight is not a very good piece. Now b3 by Caruana, just improving the position a little bit, preventing the pawn from hanging on b2 from the strong bishop if you move the knight, and also preventing c4 breaks. Bishop back to f7. And now, like we mentioned, there isn't much scope for white to really do anything with his pawn, so he's just improving pieces, and he figures, okay, the knight was hanging on c3. Well, the queen was protecting it, but it means that the queen was stuck there, so knight d1. The knight also didn't have any squares to go to, really. It was being, hindered by this pawn on c6. So greener pastures maybe on the king side, knight d1. Useful move. Here, Carlsen could have continued to improve his position, maybe play bishop to g6. Even a move like king b7, getting the king slightly more secure, is a solid move, but here he went for a pawn sacrifice, which perhaps wasn't strictly necessary, but probably okay. White took the pawn, because, well, why not? The knight wasn't doing much. And now knight e6. Carlsen's idea is that once the knight jumps into f4, he's going to open up the position, and the white king will start to feel the pressure from the opened lines on the king side. The knight went back to h5, but here actually white missed an interesting option to play a move such as knight to d7. And this might neutralize the bishop pair because we're attacking two pieces at the same time, this one and this one on f7, and you can't protect both. So this probably would have equalized the game. Instead, knight to h5. So black still has the slight upper hand here. takes on h5 and brings the knight into f4. Now this dangerous knight must be eliminated. It's threatening the pawn and this pawn, although you want to take this one. So white eliminates it, and now g takes f4. And here comes the draft around the white king that we were talking about. The rooks can swing over. This guy is feeling the air gusting around him. Rook g2 was played, but turns out maybe rook takes f4 was the best way to defend here, to take on f4 and sacrifice the exchange in case of black taking everything, giving a quick check first and then taking. White's pawn structure is very compact. He has 7 pawns against 5, so material is technically equal, and it's very hard for black to activate the rooks, which means that white should be able to defend here and even have his own chances. But he played in the move, rook to g2 here. Carlsen went for the trade, rook 8 to g8, and then he took on g2, and queen to e6. Simple move, protecting g8, so he can swing the other rook over. But white can now finally bring the knight back into the game, knight from d1 to f2, and from there it can interpose on g4, protected by the pawn. Carlsen is temporarily down a pawn here, but okay, these are double pawns here and much worse than the c pawns. But Carlsen can immediately recoup the pawn here with queen to e8, simply targeting this pawn, which will drop next move. Queen to f3, starting to get out of the pinch, and now king to f2. Here Caruana realizes that the king is in some danger here on the king side, and his plan is to maybe at some stage move it over to the queen side where it should be safer, especially if you can put the king on d2, maybe play c3. But at least he's unpinning for now. So king to f2. Bishop c7, because, well, now white can maybe take. So bishop c7, and of course keeping this important pawn. And here, yeah, the best move would have been e5, giving white some fighting chances. But here he blunders, and this is a potential game-losing blunder. He played king to e2. And Carlsen did not miss his chance here. He played queen to g5. And it turns out now that with h5 coming, black is just penetrating here. Another bad move by Caruana here, knight to h2. And here Carlsen played h5. Instead, he could have played queen to e5, a very strong move. Since the queen wants to come into b2, we start picking up pawns, and we can also play rook to g3. Very strong threats, difficult for white to deal with this, and he was also down on the clock here. But h5 doesn't spoil anything. Black still has the massive upper hand here. But here another opportunity to find a very good move. Carlsen played queen to g1, this one, but queen to g7 again was very strong. And once again you just want to penetrate with the queen and start to attack the weaknesses. Queen g1 doesn't spoil anything yet, but once you start making some inaccuracies, things can slip away. But here, yeah, Caruana starts to organize a defense. He plays knight to f1. Preventing the queen from swinging over here to again attack the weaknesses. And here Carlsen played h4. He should have played king to b7. And king to b7 simply protects the weakness on c6. Now why is that important? We'll see after h4, which was played in the game, pawn to h4. Here again Caruana misses active defense with e5. What this does is, well, the queen attacks the pawn on c6, and if you can take there, your queen becomes active, black will become weak on the light squares, and you're also attacking this pawn, and black can't protect both, and this would actually more or less equalize the game. Instead, he played king to d2, and now again, Carlsen is back with the upper hand, c3. Trying to plug some holes on the dark squares. You notice that this diagonal was quite a weak one, but trying to plug it up with c3, bishop e5 nonetheless. But here Carlsen again misses a good opportunity, and probably just an outright winning move here with rook to g3. Okay, this is hanging, but this is not a healthy dessert for white. If he takes this, h takes g3, and the position just crumbles really quickly. The rook must go somewhere. Let's say we go to e2, bishop to e5, king c2 and queen e1, queen to a1, and again now we're starting to pick up stuff. This is hanging as well. White can't defend all his weaknesses, and these pawns are actually quite strong and will threaten the queen at a later stage. And meanwhile, the king here sitting pretty quite safe. This would have been winning. But bishop e5, king c2, and now queen g7. Still b5 would have been a strong move here. Ideas like opening up more weaknesses on dark squares, but queen g7 was played. Caruana played knight to h2, and now Carlsen loses most of his advantage here, if not all of it, with bishop takes c3. Turns out the best move was actually to go back to g1. Now we want to go here, so we would repeat with knight to f1, but now we can go back to the position where b5 was the best move, and black keeps his advantage. Still ideas of playing rook g3 are in the air. It's not as strong as before, but after b5 it's back on the agenda and should be winning again. But no, Carlsen took on c3, and now Caruana got the f pawn, bishop to d4, and here he went for simplification, queen trade, queen to f7 check. Now Carlsen doesn't take, he plays king a6. He doesn't take because takes. The king somewhere, you really don't want to go to the back rank. So here, I guess a move like knight to f3, and this pawn is actually a sitting duck as well. So white is close to equalizing here, although it's not completely clear, but Carlsen went with king to a6. Caruana traded, and here, just in time, Caruana found counterplay. His problem is that black is coming in here with rook g3 takes on h3, and the rook can't leave the second rank because of the other threat, rook to g2 check, which would pick up the knight, so you have to stay on the second rank, and rook e2 actually does that quite well, and as we'll see. Now all of a sudden white has his own trump, the e pawn. The rook comes in, rook g3, and now some forcing moves, knight to g4, takes the pawn, pushes the pawn, and here Carlsen must find a way back home with the rook. He went rook to f3, e6, rook to f8, just in time, e7, and rook to e8. Fortunately, still he has a very strong bishop which covers and actually dominates this knight here, so it can't come into f6 attacking the rook. But Caruana goes for rerouting the knight here with knight to h6, h3, and knight to f5, protecting the pawn. Now with the pawn protected, the rook is free to attack this pawn, so bishop f6 attacks the pawn on e7. And now a high-class move by Caruana. If he goes immediately for the pawn, let's say rook h2, he played a3. If rook h2, we takes, rook takes h3, now rook e2, and now with the pawn on a2 still weak, the king would have to go to b1, and now this guy can actually enter the game. So a3 sort of anticipates that, which means that now once you go for the h3 pawn, your pawn will not be hanging here, and maybe your king can go to c3 in the line where the rook comes in. b5 by Carlsen here, and now b4. Carlsen takes, finally undoubling the pawns, and he is still up a pawn, but the main problem here is that his king can't really do anything. So black is almost in Zugzwang. If king b7, then obviously knight to d6, picking up the rook on e8. And if king b6, nonetheless knight to d6. If you move the rook here, I will queen the pawn, so you have to take it, but now I give you a check, king somewhere, and white is winning. So Carlsen was almost forced here to go into a rook ending. He took on e7. This temporarily loses a piece, but playing the pawn to h2 means that we have deflected the rook, which must now take the pawn. And now we take the knight. So 3 pawns against 2, which unfortunately for Carlsen is really difficult to win. Let's see how he got along. He didn't really try much here. He sort of went in circles, you know, thinking how he can improve the position. So let's just see the moves. Attacking the pawn on c6, defending it. Caruana just waits. King c3, rook to d7, king c7, rook waits, rook d6, cutting off the 6th rank. Rook h8, rook to g6. Still not demonstrating any plan for black here. King to b7, the rook goes back. Rook g5. Caruana gives it a check and then pins the pawn. So Carlsen's only plan here is to play either a5 or c5, trying to exchange one pawn and get a pass pawn. But still it's going to be difficult to win. But as we know, Carlsen is an endgame wizard. So let's see. King to c2. Rook to f1. Still not much happening. They're you know, sort of probing, going back and forth, and there's really no plan here. Carlsen is just waiting around, trying to find a plan. Rook to h8. Still no change really in the position. Rook to a8, and now Caruana changes the position. He plays d4. Okay, we still keep going. Rook to d8. Rook h6. Rook d7. Rook g6. King c7. Still no plan. Rook g5, rook d6. Okay, I jump to some moves there. Rook d6, rook back to g8, and let's go quickly here. There's not much happening. Rook h3 check, king c2, rook a3, king b2 attacking the rook, attacking the pawn on b4, defending it. a6. You still can't advance the pawn. Rook to h8, rook a3 check, king to b2. And the rook swings over to g3. And yeah, king c2. So really not many complications here for white. Rook g5, rook h6. Oops. See, I skipped around, but we can hardly tell the difference. King c3, rook d6. So a long game. Rook g6. We're on move 83 here. King c2, king b7. King c3, some rook checks, rook g1. So, I mean, at this stage, I'm not sure what Carlsen was trying. Caruana has demonstrated that he can hold this quite easily, but perhaps he was trying to tire his opponent out a little bit. It is a long match, so maybe he wants to use the stamina edge, so sort of that he should have. Rook to f6, but to be honest, again, there's not much going on here. King to c2, rook h5. The king is just going back and forth, and the rook is staying on the 6th. Rook to d5, rook h6. When the king peeks out, we give a check. Rook d7, rook h5, rook to d6, rook h8. Still no plan. Carlsen gives a check, but now simply king to c2. Here the rook moved over to a3, and now things finally started to happen. Something happened after a back and forth battle. King to d6. The king is threatening to penetrate. Now, is this enough for a win? He's coming into a juicy square, and there are some pawn weaknesses to pick up. Rook a7, king d5. Looks good, doesn't it? Juicy pawn here. If he can win another pawn, he has tremendous winning chances, probably winning. But what happens? King b2, and now where to put the rook? Now the problem becomes that if you move the rook away from the a file, then rook takes on a6. So if you want to keep the a pawn, you have to play rook to a4. But then king c3, and turns out you have no good way to improve your position. Once you move your rook, whether it be to a1 or a3 check, I go back to b2. etc. So in the game, Carlsen tried rook to d3, but this of course drops the a6 pawn. Now rook takes d4, king to b3, rook to e4, and unfortunately black can't really improve his position. White will just keep an attack on this pawn here on c6, so whenever you activate the king, I will take your pawn. So this happened, king c3, rook c4, king b3, king to d4, and again back and forth, just keeping an eye on the c6 pawn. King d3, rook a6, rook to c2, rook b6, now I give a check, king back, and rook c4, and of course king back up, and rook d5, king d5. And here actually a draw was agreed. The problem is, even if you manage to like swing the rook over, give a check, get the king in, and take the pawn, that the g pawn, the b pawn, it's very easily holdable. You just bring your king back to b1, and passive defense works. And once you get the rook on the first rank, it's a dead draw. So after rook a8 here on the 115th move, a draw was finally agreed. So almost eyeing the record for the longest game in the World Championship history. The longest game was Korchnoi against Karpov in 1978, I believe, game 5. And Carlsen against Anand in Sochi, game 7, lasted 122 moves. The Karpov-Korchnoi game was 124. So 150 moves here by Caruana Carlsen. Might be close to the number 3 spot if it's not the number 3 spot, but finally a draw. I believe Carlsen must be quite upset. He missed a number of wins, had a very promising position, a winning one. Couldn't convert, but it's hard to say psychologically what this game will do. Probably it's very good for Caruana that he avoids the loss there after struggling so much in the game, so he can use that, you know, to build up his confidence. But Carlsen, I mean, black in the first game, you would have been fine with a draw. So I mean, of course he's going to be upset, but you know, no harm, no foul. Nothing really happened. But all in all, a great start to the World Championship match. Fantastic game. Could have been won by either side. The only downside was that it dragged on for a little bit too long. They could have settled on a draw a long time ago, but it is what it is. So that was the first game, and I will see you in game 2. Very excited about this match. See you guys. Bye bye.